Tonight, passenger bill of rights.
That ticket is a contract with obligations.
What Canadian Airlines could soon owe you. Are the new rules tough enough?
It's a step forward, a tremendous step forward.
The Supreme Court attacks racism in the justice system. Why not everyone is happy with its ruling. And inside the epicenter of Raptors fan fever, on the eve of a historic game, this is The National. Have you ever been stuck on a plane on the tarmac for hours with no food or water, bumped from a flight because it's overbooked, or forced to pay a fee to sit with your children? For years, Europe has had laws to protect airline passengers, and now, finally, Canada is catching up. Beginning July 15th, airlines must provide up to $2,400 for bumping passengers. They must also pony up for lost or damaged bags up to $2,100. Runway delays are also covered. Carriers must provide food and water when planes are stuck on the tarmac, and after 3 hours, they must return to the gate. A second phase of the rules come into effect December 15th. Airlines will then have to pay for some delays or cancellations, those payments hitting $1,000 for delays lasting more than 9 hours. So, lots of rules, but will things improve? Ali Chiasson takes a closer look.
And I find a lot of times when things happen with the airlines is they don't care.
The new air passenger protection regulations will see airlines pay when they fail to provide adequate services.
That ticket is a contract with obligations for both the airline and the traveler.
The issue was brought to the forefront when passengers on board this Air Transat flight called 911 after being stuck on the tarmac in Ottawa for hours. They had no air conditioning and few provisions. Under the new rules,
If takeoff is not imminent within 3 hours, passengers must be allowed to disembark.
the regulations also call for better communication with passengers regarding flight status. Instead of looking it up online or on airport screens, the rules suggest emails or notifications to your phone.
If your flight is delayed, depending on the amount of time, you could be eligible to get $125 back, up to $1,000, but that's only if it's delayed for reasons that are within the airline's control.
For instance, the mechanical loophole. The airline can say, oh, we have a mechanical problem, so you're not entitled to compensation.
While the feds today were confident these new rules are a win for travelers,
We think we have it right.
passenger advocates and experts agree.
These new rules are far from perfect.
Some worry airlines can take advantage of loopholes.
That's exactly what we've pressed for, is that the CTA needs to have an audit function. They've said they'll be installing one. We'll see how it goes. What we're going to be doing for the future is watching exactly to see how well does the government enforce this, but also how well do the airlines respect the spirit and the letter of these new rules.
It's always a matter of interpretation, so it will be up to passengers to, if you will, help hold the airlines accountable.
Passengers will be able to challenge an airline's reasoning with the Canadian Transportation Agency. To some, that extra step will be worth it.
Having that compensation is very important, and I think that's a really great thing that the government's doing for sure.
I'm a pretty optimistic person, so I hope it does make a change.
The government wants to avoid another scene like this one. Unhappy passengers and headlines for days. Ali Chiasson, CBC News, Mississauga, Ontario.
And airlines do have a big incentive to abide by these new regulations. They'll be subject to penalties of up to $25,000 per incident. Now to an alarming arrest in Saskatoon. Police have charged a 13-year-old girl after a woman was swarmed and brutally attacked by a group of children. Police say the other kids involved are too young to charge, but as Bonnie Allen explains, this isn't the first incident that they've had to investigate.
When the video starts, Bonnie Hellcrow is already down on the ground. 5 children take turns punching and kicking her in the head and back. Other children at the playground watch or cheer. She tries to fend off the attack, but
I couldn't fight kids, you know, like, it's just not in me to fight kids.
the 33-year-old mother is still bruised and shaken up. Helcrow says the attack in Pleasant Hill Park happened after she saw a group of children throwing rocks at an elderly man. She threatened to call police.
One of those kids grabbed my cell phone from me, and I wrestled him and I grabbed my cell phone, but as soon as I was down on the ground, they all started swarming me.
Across the street, Lou and Carolyn Rogers watched in horror.
These kids are, like I said, wild dogs. There's no control.
Kids ganging up like that, what hope do I have against 20 kids?
This inner-city neighborhood has long been plagued by poverty, drug addiction, and gang violence. Shane Partridge is blaming this violence by children on a lack of activities and supervision.
7 o'clock, kids are bored and they're roaming around the neighborhood. They're being influenced by people on the street, using drugs, alcohol.
And things can go wrong quickly.
Lots of other kids come in.
Psychologist Deborah Pepler studies bullying and swarming.
It's just horrifying.
She has recorded children on playgrounds to see how their behavior escalates in a group.
It's like stepping into an action film. It's highly, highly arousing and exciting. The other thing is that the more excited one child becomes, the more reinforcing it is for another.
And not just this one time, say Saskatoon police. They're investigating 3 assaults. Bonnie Allen, CBC News, Regina.
And one more note on this story. The video of the assault was shot by a man who happened to be there. CBC News spoke to him about why he didn't intervene. He says he feared for his safety, and he didn't want to do anything that might jeopardize his permanent resident status, something that he's expecting to get any time now. Turning now to a judgment from Canada's top court about a shocking case. Not just because of the horrific nature of the alleged crime, but also because of the way the victim was treated by this country's justice system. She was a mother, a daughter, a friend, and a member of her community. Her life mattered. She was valued and important. She was loved. Those are the words in a powerful Supreme Court decision today about Cindy Gladue in ordering a new trial for the man accused of taking her life. 8 years ago, Gladue bled to death in an Alberta hotel room from a wound in her vaginal wall. Bradley Barton said they had rough but consensual sex. In 2015, he was acquitted at trial. The case sparked protests across the country about the way Cindy Gladue was portrayed as an Indigenous woman working in the sex trade, and about racism in the justice system. As David Cochran explains, the Supreme Court acknowledged today the system failed her.
I'm happy that it's going back down for trial, if happy is the right word.
A mixed reaction to a split decision. The Supreme Court was unanimous that Bradley Barton should face a new trial for the death of Cindy Gladue. But a 4-3 majority ruled it should be for manslaughter, not murder, as the minority justices and much of the public wanted.
It was a horror show the first time. It will be worse. So like I said, there's no good answer here, but I don't think the court did enough.
Indigenous rights activists wanted more, but it is a new trial, ordered because the original judge made numerous errors. Gladue's sexual history was entered as evidence without a proper hearing or proper consideration. The Alberta judge also failed to give proper instructions to the jurors about consent.
So we're grateful that the justice system is going to try to seek justice for Cindy, but it is a sad day.
This case also highlighted concerns about the way Indigenous women are portrayed in court, especially in cases of sexual assault. At trial, Gladue was referred to repeatedly as a Native woman or Native prostitute. More shocking was the fact her vaginal tissue was preserved and tabled as evidence.
I don't believe we would ever cut up a man's body parts and bring it into court as evidence. I think this is misogynistic and a basic racist element that is inherent in our courts and has been there for a long time.
It's a step forward, a tremendous step forward.
The step forward is the court's unanimous recognition this needs to change. So the justices issued new guidelines to trial judges.
There's an obligation on courts, on judges, to be gatekeepers, to ensure that bias, prejudice, racism, and sexism do not form part of the evidence, are not what juries and judges rely on to make their decisions.
And David, let's shift the focus here for a moment to the man accused of this crime, Bradley Barton. CBC News spoke with his lawyer earlier today, and what's their reaction?
Yeah, that's right, Ian. We spoke with Dino Batos earlier today, and despite the new trial being ordered, he considers this decision to be a bit of a win for his client. And the reason being is that first-degree murder charge is now off the table. The retrial will be on the lesser charge of manslaughter. And what Batos tells us is that his client was acquitted the first time around, and he is equally optimistic that that will happen the second time around. And Ian, we should tell you that retrial, that's set to happen early in the new year.
All right, David Cochran in Ottawa. Thank you.
You're welcome.
There was another big court decision in this country today, this one involving the battle over the expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline to move oil from Alberta to the British Columbia coast. BC had asked its top court to answer a key question. Does the government have the authority to pass environmental laws blocking the expansion? Greg Rasmussen now on the ruling and what it means for Canada as a whole.
BC Premier John Horgan managed to keep smiling today despite a big loss in a provincial courtroom.
Of course, I'm disappointed with the decision of the appeal court. We put forward our view that provincial jurisdiction was paramount in this instance.
This was one of those rare court cases where arguments were televised.
Serious consequences for First Nations lands.
The 5 justices were unanimous. The federal government is in charge when it comes to interprovincial pipelines and what's in them. Provinces such as BC have to defer to federal regulators, in this case, the National Energy Board. While it was disappointment in BC, it was a win for Alberta Premier Jason Kenney, who said it was time to end what he called a campaign of obstruction.
One province cannot block another province's resources and assets. This is a critical strategic victory for Alberta.
At stake, billions of dollars and thousands of jobs in both provinces. Although it's a win on one front for Alberta and the oil industry, the project remains caught up in other legal and regulatory knots.
That we're going to need to see shovels in the ground. We're going to need to see us actually clearing the barrier as opposed to just getting the legal decision.
But in BC, opposition remains strong. More protests like this are expected, and some powerful Indigenous groups vow the project will never be built. Today's decision will now automatically be reviewed by the Supreme Court of Canada, and opponents promise other legal attacks will continue over environmental and Indigenous concerns.
So there are issues out there that potentially will delay, disrupt, and prevent this pipeline from going through.
Meaning today's court ruling won't change this. Pipes stacked in storage, waiting for the outcome of a fight measured in years. Greg Rasmussen, CBC News, Vancouver.
We're following several other stories tonight on The National. Canada's Chief of Defence Staff has accepted full responsibility for the handling of a ceremony for an Afghanistan war monument. The memorial from Kandahar was moved to the new National Defence headquarters in a private ceremony. Some relatives of those killed in Afghanistan were angry at not being invited. In a long written apology, General Jonathan Vance said, "I am truly sorry for our insensitivity and the pain, anger, and frustration that this decision caused. A system of escorted visits for family members to see the memorial is in the works." Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott plan to end the speculation about their political futures with a pair of news conferences scheduled for Monday. The two MPs quit cabinet over the SNC-Lavalin affair, and they were later expelled from the Liberal caucus by the Prime Minister.
We are still not out of the clear up north. It's been very dry. It remains windy. It remains poor conditions.
Nearly 400 firefighters, along with helicopters and air tankers, continue to fight the large wildfire near High Level, Alberta. The flames are out of control and now cover nearly 100,000 hectares. But they're not getting closer to the town, and that's good news for the 5,000 people forced from their homes earlier this week. Donald Trump alleges his 2016 presidential campaign was spied on by the FBI. And now he's given his Attorney General extra power in order to look into that. As Ellen Morrow explains, critics worry that could do lasting damage to the country.
An investigation into the investigators. President Trump's long-held goal, he's now made easier.
Everything they want, I put it under the auspices of the Attorney General.
An attorney general with new power. Trump has authorized William Barr to declassify and release intelligence as he investigates surveillance of the Trump campaign during the 2016 election. The president also ordered the CIA, FBI, and other agencies to cooperate.
They'll be able to see how this how the hoax or witch hunt started and why it started.
Trump has repeatedly attacked the FBI, saying it illegally spied on his campaign.
Thinking back on all the different...
Last month, the attorney general weighed in.
I think there was spying did occur.
Barr added he needed to look into whether any rules were violated.
I have an obligation to make sure that government power is not abused.
But Democrats say Barr's investigation and his new powers from the president are the real abuse of power, and that the president is just trying to sully an investigation that did not clear him of obstruction of justice.
What they're really trying to do is to divert attention from the Mueller report and from the president's actions against the rule of law to an imaginary scandal.
There are also worries over a political appointee having the power to declassify top-secret intelligence, one who's been criticized by Robert Mueller for the handling of his report.
I think it's very important for our country to find out what happened.
As always, how anyone sees what happened will likely depend on what side they're already on. Ellen Morrow, CBC News, Washington.
Up next on The National, where does Theresa May's emotional resignation leave the never-ending Brexit debate? And they come from all over, no matter the weather, to cheer on their team. We'll take you to ground zero for Raptors fans. Plus,
sometimes, Princess, sometimes you just have to take a risk.
Disney's newest prince is a Canadian. Aladdin's homecoming, ahead on The National.
I will shortly leave the job that it has been the honour of my life to hold. The second female Prime Minister, but certainly not the last. I do so with no ill will, but with enormous and enduring gratitude to have had the opportunity to serve the country I love.
An emotional Theresa May bowed and broken by Brexit. She will resign as Britain's Prime Minister June 7th. Closing the door on her tumultuous time at number 10 Downing Street. Her departure after 3 years in power, the result of her failed attempts at delivering on a divorce deal with Europe. Before retreating to her home riding, she promised to stay on as caretaker prime minister until a new leader is chosen, likely by late July. May had been under pressure to quit for months, so now that she's agreed to go, what's the upshot of her exit? Margaret Evans has that story from London.
The wheel of power can be fickle, and today it finally turned on Theresa May's premiership. Often derided for a lack of emotion, it slipped through at the very end, garnering May some sympathy on the streets.
I don't know that anybody else in her shoes would have done anything differently, and I just think she's got the rough end of the stick.
No one's perfect. I know she's got a big job to do, and all of our livelihoods are riding on it, but she's still a person.
Others were far less forgiving.
I put her in the box of politicians that are out for their own party and their own like, and not out for everyone.
Do you think it changes anything about where Britain is in terms of Brexit and politics?
Oh no, I don't think it'll change anything.
Very papers, very standard.
In other words, falling on her sword might not change the fortunes of her party or the country.
No matter how history judges Theresa May, one thing is certain. The problem that ultimately led to her undoing, Brexit, is still there, ready and waiting for her successor.
The contest to replace May will begin in June, first with Conservative MPs voting and then the party membership.
What her departure will do is enhance the likelihood that we might leave with no deal, because any candidate for leadership will have to appeal to the Conservative activist base, which is much more Brexit-leaning than the parliamentary parties.
The front-runner in a crowded field is none other than Boris Johnson, the former London mayor known as much for what critics call his buffoonery as for his driving ambition. He said he'll take Britain out of the EU by October 31st, with or without an agreement on how. That prospect is already raising alarm bells.
I think we need a general election. We don't need another Tory leader installed by Tory MPs.
One of the only certainties in the days ahead is that May's dancing days are now numbered. Yet another British Conservative leader felled by divisions within her own party over Europe, divisions that have long since seeped into the country as a whole. Margaret Evans, CBC News, London.
Ahead on The National, he is the new Aladdin. We're there as he returns home to Canada to surprise a theater full of kids from his old high school. Plus,
The way this city and this country have come together over this is amazing.
the Raptors could make history tomorrow night, so tonight we'll take you deep into Jurassic Park for a look at why fans come from all over. But first, in case you missed it, think of Mount Everest, and this is probably what comes to mind: rugged and remote, stunning and ruthless, which helps explain why this photo is getting so much attention. A traffic jam at the summit 2 days ago. Mountaineers standing in line to reach the highest peak in the world during a window of good weather. It is striking and it's dangerous, and it has some calling for fewer permits to be issued to climbers. Nepal has issued about 380 for this season. At that elevation, with oxygen levels so low, a delay can cause exhaustion, dehydration, even death. In fact, 7 climbers are believed to have died this week, though it's not clear if that traffic jam is to blame. One was Don Cash from Utah. He likely died of altitude sickness on his way down from the top.
He was just an amazing human being and inspired everybody. It's almost fitting that that's his final resting place.
Cash had set out to join the 7 Summits Club, climbing the tallest mountains on each continent. Everest was the last on his list.
You know, you didn't make it back, but you did summit, you conquered your dream, so I'm proud of him.
Lopez. The Toronto Raptors take Game 5 on the road in Milwaukee.
And with that, the Raps entered uncharted territory on the verge of their deepest ever postseason run. Among the legions of Canadian fans, a couple of faces you'll recognize.
We're extremely excited about the Raptors. Obviously, my son is a massive Raptors fan.
I love Toronto. I love this team, and we're going to the NBA Finals. Let's go!
The team's first chance to secure that spot comes tomorrow night when they host the Bucks for Game 6. So the excitement in Toronto is off the charts. On game nights, bars are packed, downtown streets are jammed, but nowhere is the energy more electric than the place they call Jurassic Park. It became a second stadium of sorts again last night, and just as it has throughout the playoffs, rain or shine, win or lose, it will be a madhouse again tomorrow night too. Devin Huru shows us why watching the game outside might be even more intimate than inside the arena.
This is the epicenter, the ultimate Raptors tailgate party, standing for hours, cheering their heroes. The close quarters, that's not a problem. It's part of the fun.
How long did you wait to be right at the front? This is a prime spot.
2 hours, man. I didn't even get to pee.
We are done! We are done! They've been gathering in this square for games since 2014, all ages.
Go, Raptors, go!
Full of hope.
It's destiny, baby. It's destiny.
Through the thick and thin.
I've been through the losses. I've been through the wins. You know, there were tough times, there were great times, but, you know, that's how it is.
But they keep coming, drawn by the possibility of a moment like this.
For the win!
If one shot could tell these people one story, here it is. This year, Kawhi Leonard might just take them to the summit.
Kawhi Leonard, out here, this is our year to win the championship.
Did you guys get it? Kawhi not? Like, why not?
As they live and die on every shot, block, steal, and slam.
Hello,
Leonard has only upped the frenzy.
MVP! MVP!
The way this city and this country have come together over this is amazing.
And not just from the locals.
We are from Japan.
And you're Raptors fans?
Yes, definitely.
Where are you from? Panama. You watch the Raptors. Yeah.
And then there's Drake, Toronto's own, better known for his courtside antics, but he knows where center stage is.
We have the best player. We have the best fans in the whole NBA, in the whole world. Look around you. Look at this. We created this.
But this isn't about celebrity. It's about community and perseverance. Now just one win away from the NBA Finals, a first ever. So they'll be here on Saturday night, Raptors fans at Jurassic Park, and they'll be hungry. Devin Haru, CBC News, Toronto.
The success of the Raptors reflects the spectacular rise of basketball in this country since the NBA expanded here 25 years ago, with a growing list of homegrown stars and young Canadians in this year's draft, all of which opened the door to a rare interview with the NBA Commissioner Adam Silver. He's done a lot to change the game and its culture since taking the job. Rosemary Barton sat down with Silver at NBA headquarters in New York earlier this month.
He is a woke leader in woke times. In his 5 years as the head of the NBA, Adam Silver has tackled everything from gender equality to racism.
The views expressed by Mr. Sterling are deeply offensive and harmful. That they came from an NBA owner only heightens the damage and my personal outrage. I am banning Mr. Sterling for life.
It took Silver just 2 months on the job to set the tone of how he intended to lead the league, forcing the sale of the Los Angeles Clippers when its owner, Donald Sterling, was caught on tape making racist comments. 2 years later, Silver was at it again, pulling the All-Star game out of Charlotte in response to North Carolina's controversial bathroom law that discriminated against transgender people.
We stand united being against any form of discrimination for any group in our society.
And when the NFL froze out Colin Kaepernick for protesting racial injustice in America, Silver said he was proud of the response shown by NBA players as they rallied behind Kaepernick's cause. It's no wonder he's being called the most progressive commissioner in professional sports. We're happy to have a time with you. I caught up with him at the NBA headquarters in New York. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks for making time for Canada, Commissioner. I appreciate
Absolutely.
Obviously, we're feeling pretty good in Canada. We only have the one team, as you know. So
You used to have two.
I know. We'll get to that.
All right.
We'll get to that. We're about to celebrate 25 years of the NBA in Canada. How do you feel it has gone, with the exception of the other team, which we will get to, but the success of the Raptors? What are your thoughts about it?
My thoughts are it's gone incredibly well.
Yeah.
I was here 25 years ago when we expanded to Canada, and I think if we rolled the clock back and said, what are our fondest hopes and prospects for basketball in Canada, I think we've met them. I mean, the fact now that we have more players in the league from outside the United States, that the most players are from Canada, 13 right now in the league, which is quite incredible. And we're seeing stars emerging out of Canada. And of course, we're seeing the success of the Raptors right now. And the country, it's not just Ontario, but the country, has adopted the Raptors as their own. And lastly, I'll just say we're seeing it in terms of participation. We're seeing young kids, boys and girls, embracing the sport.
Since you were here when the expansion happened and there was initially the team in Vancouver, I know David Stern previously expressed regret that didn't work out. Do you have the same sentiment, or do you think it was ultimately best that the Grizzlies left when they did?
That's a tough one. I think in retrospect, I wish we had a team in Vancouver right now. I think clearly Canada could handle two NBA teams, sort of west and east in the country. So I share David's sentiment that we do have regret. I think we were a bit ahead of our time. I think there was a moment in the league where prospects seemed down in terms of the team. Attendance was down, ratings were down. So I understood from an economic standpoint why the then team owner wanted to move the team. And unfortunately, we're not in expansion mode right now, but it would be nice to have a team in Vancouver. It's a great market. I frankly have some in-laws that live in Vancouver. You know, I get there. It's a beautiful city. Yeah. But we have regrets, and I think from a business standpoint, it's a failure. I mean, any market we leave, there's no other way to look at it.
What about the concerns that there have been, continue to be, I think, over Canadian teams being able to retain star players, whether it be taxes, weather, or whatever? Do you think that those concerns have faded away, or do you think that the Raptors are still trying to? I think they are. If you look at Kawhi, that they're still struggling with that. How do you keep big names?
I don't think that the Raptors are struggling with that. I mean, we'll see what happens here, but I think increasingly we're a 30-team league, and those issues weren't unique to the Raptors. I mean, people have historically said that about lots of markets in the United States. And I think, frankly, in the old days, there was some truth to it from an economic standpoint, that if you were in a larger market in the U.S. as opposed to a smaller market, there was more economic opportunity for the player. I think that's very much changed now. I think that if we have Giannis Antetokounmpo in Milwaukee, viewed as a small market in the U.S., he happened to be the #1 vote getter for fans globally for All-Star this year. I think that makes the point that with digital media and social media these days, you can be a huge global star regardless of where you are. And I mean, given what an incredible city Toronto is, I think the way players see it now, that if I can prosper there, if we have a well-managed team, which you do there, and the team can be successful, and you know, we're seeing obviously real success with the Raptors right now. I don't see any reason why a player wouldn't want to spend his career there.
So what do you think is going to happen to Kawhi Leonard? Because it's a lot of anxiety right now. People are relying on him, and they see a future with him.
The truth is, I don't know. From that standpoint, I really know more than a fan. I mean, I don't think it's my role to sort of question a player, and I think in many cases, I think these are young men who often don't know themselves, and until they're ready to make that decision, they seem to be fully focused. I think Kawhi would be an example of a player like this, who he's all about winning, and I think when it comes time to make that decision, he will, but I have no reason to believe that he isn't incredibly happy in Toronto, and again, we're seeing the success on the floor right now.
How much of the success of the Raptors has to do with Masai, and how much of his success is part of your global footprint because he's the first exec from Africa? How important is that to you?
Masai is incredibly important to this league and to the Raptors. I mean, to your point, I mean, certainly our first African-born GM. He grew up in Nigeria, and I think but is very much a global citizen, and I think that makes sort of him a great fit for Toronto, very much a global city. I mean, and look, 25% of the players in this league right now were born outside the United States, so I think for many of our players, they love the diversity of Toronto. They love living in Canada, so it's very much a positive for a lot of our players.
Why has the NBA taken such a progressive stance on so many social and cultural issues? The All-Stars game in North Carolina, allowing the players to be very much themselves, political if they want to be, and not if they don't. Why is that so important to you, to be progressive in that way?
I think it's part of the DNA of this league. I think the international influence on this league as well. I mean, the fact that we're a diverse league in many ways. I think we preach tolerance to people, that we're accepting of lots of different viewpoints in this league. And something I'm particularly proud of is that as we talk about the safety in being allowed to talk about issues that are important to you, that's been translated by a group of our current players into talking about issues of mental health and wellness. And Kevin Love, DeMar DeRozan, of course, speaking out about anxiety and depression.
I think everyone walks around with something that you can't see.
We all go through it. I don't care who you are. I don't care who you are, man.
The best thing that I did was to come out and say, hey, look, I need some help.
It's been amazing to me because their willingness to talk openly about issues like that has opened the door for literally millions of young people to feel comfortable thinking, well, if these supposedly tough athletes, can destigmatize talking about issues like that, and for those young people, it's not necessarily even about speaking out publicly. It's about their willingness to say to a parent, a teacher, an administrator, a coach that I'm not feeling well, there's something bothering me. Things that I know that when I was a kid, you know, and played sports, was something that seemed like the furthest from your imagination, that you would be able to tell someone something like that.
The NBA has gone a long way to support the WNBA and women playing basketball, as you say, even in the coaching staff. In Canada, there was the CWHL that just folded, and lots of the women players have now reached out to the NHL to say, why can't you help support us? So I'm just wondering if there's a lesson in what you guys do for the WNBA for other leagues to try and support women in professional sport.
You know, I'm always reluctant to weigh in on other leagues, only because I don't know enough about it. I mean, I certainly read the stories about you know, the hockey league folding, I would say.
But how important is that to the NBA?
Well, the case of the NBA, the WNBA is critically important. I mean, we've been operating that league for 22 years now, but there are difficult business issues. We haven't turned it into a sustainable business yet, but we're on the path to doing so. I think we, in terms of the NBA, we look at it as a strong investment on behalf of basketball generally, on behalf of women. That's why I recognize for hockey or for any other sport, you said it earlier, these are larger societal issues. And again, with the WNBA, I think in many ways we're way ahead of our time, because it's just now we're beginning to see the mainstream acceptance of professional women's sports. And ultimately, if it's going to be a business, that's required, because you need people to buy the tickets and buy the merchandise and watch it on television.
Yeah. What happens if we win? What happens if Canada wins? Is that a bad thing?
Are you kidding? It's a wonderful thing. I think whoever wins the championship no doubt deserves it. And so I'm rooting for all our teams.
Do you love your job?
I really do.
Yeah, you could tell. Yeah. Thank you for the time. I really appreciate
Thanks
it.
For
so
being
nice
here.
to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
What a great conversation, and that was just part of it. Rosie also asked Silver about tackling racism head on. You can see the full interview on cbcnews.ca or on YouTube at CBC The National. Up next on the program, the new Canadian star of Disney's Aladdin returns home for a surprise.
Hey, can you make me a prince? There is a lot of gray area in Make Me a Prince.
Don't ever let anyone tell you that you cannot do it, because you can.
From Markham, Ontario to the star of one of the biggest movies of the year. We'll have his story straight after the break. A Wisconsin judge handed down 2 consecutive life sentences today to the man who kidnapped 13-year-old Jamie Kloss and killed her parents last October.
You are the embodiment of evil, and the public can only be safe if you are incarcerated until you die.
In March, 21-year-old Jake Patterson pleaded guilty and admitted that he shot his way into the Kloss family home, killing Jamie's parents and kidnapping the 13-year-old, keeping her hostage for about 3 months until Jamie managed to escape. French police are searching for a suspected suitcase bomber tonight after an explosion in Lyon left 13 people injured. The partially masked suspect appeared in security camera footage before leaving a bag outside a bakery. All of those injured in the blast were hospitalized with what are described as non-life-threatening injuries.
It was pretty well an emergency. People were panicking last night. I was crying last night.
And a sense of alarm is setting in on the Toronto Islands again as water levels rise on Lake Ontario. With the weekend forecast calling for showers and a risk of thunderstorms, residents are worried about a return of those 2017 conditions when disastrous flooding shut down the islands for much of the summer. From Ontario to Hollywood, Aladdin hit the big screen today, and so too did its Canadian star. Mena Massoud was picked to portray the Disney prince after an international search. Today he was back in his hometown of Markham, where he had some encouraging words for students from his alma mater. Tashana Reed has his story.
A whole new world. At least that's the direction Disney took on its latest live-action remake, Aladdin.
Showtime.
No, I'm in charge, okay? I say when it's time.
The movie studio brought the colorful and fictional city of Agrabah to life, with a big budget and Hollywood actor Will Smith as the iconic Blue Genie.
Can you make me a prince? There is a lot of gray area in Make Me a Prince. I could just make you a prince.
But the audience will also be introduced to a new name and face, Mena Massoud. The relatively unknown actor landed the lead role of Aladdin.
We are on our way to do some radio interviews.
Massoud has been on a magical ride promoting the film in cities around the world. At the Canadian premiere in Toronto, Massoud received a hometown welcome from old friends and new fans.
It's really special to me, and to get to spend it with Toronto, it's amazing.
There was also a special guest on the blue carpet, Massoud's now retired high school drama teacher, Dory Elliott.
He's deserving, he's talented, he's worked hard.
Elliott remembers when a quiet and soft-spoken young man showed up in her grade 10 drama class.
He sort of flew under the radar until he got up to work. And at that point, he was like a force of nature.
The Egyptian-Canadian actor beat out hundreds for the role. He remembers when he got the call.
My reps, they were like, hey, you're gonna have to go back to London again. And I was like, really? I've already tested for it a bunch of times. And they're like, yeah, to start working on the film. And I was like, what?
There's also the pressure of remaking a classic. Disney's original won 2 Academy Awards. The 2019 version has one major difference, an entire cast of diverse actors.
I'm glad I can be a part of that and you know, be an inspiration, a motivation, not just, you know, to all the kids, but especially, you know, kids of color who don't see themselves repped on screen.
In his hometown of Markham, Ontario, Massoud made one extra stop.
What's up, St. Brother Andre? What's going on?
The actor surprised an unsuspecting theater full of drama students from his old high school.
I was told growing up that, you know, the arts were just a hobby, that I couldn't do it as a career.
Even getting a bit choked up as he reflected on his own career path.
Whatever it is that you guys want to do in your life, don't ever let anyone tell you don't ever let anyone tell you that you cannot do it, because you can.
His message was not lost on the young audience.
He was just following his passions, and he came from like our high school, so it's like you can come from anywhere and reach the places you want to go.
Even if we have a dream that we think it's too big, we can really achieve it if we think we can.
Do you trust me?
And for the cast of Aladdin, they hope the magic on screen will resonate. Tashana Reed, CBC News, Markham, Ontario.
The Moment is next. After 49 years in business, a popular deli is closing down. Why one customer kept returning for more than just a sandwich.
You feel like family when you come here. It isn't just a restaurant. You can get a meal anywhere, but you can't get the feeling you get when you come and leave this place.
Do you really think the legend is true about a secret lab under this room?
Katz Deli in Toronto celebrated a birthday today for the final time. After 49 years, the shop will close its doors for good a week from now. For many people, the deli and corned beef emporium meant more than simply a place to grab a bite. One regular customer's memories are our moment.
You get treated like family when you come here. I knew Jeff, the owner, right away, and he did a bunch of special things for me when things were not so good for me. And when I didn't have any money and I would stop by and he would see me, he'd ask, why aren't you coming in? I don't have any money, Jeff. And he said, well, you know what? That doesn't make any difference, Chris. Your family here, you come in and eat. My dad, he was dying of cancer a few years ago, and my dad and I used to come here constantly. And my dad said to me, I said on his last week, I said, Dad, is there anything I can get you? Anything I could do for you? And he said, well, you know, I can't eat very much, but I could really go for a Katz takeout order. So I drove down from our farm, picked up the order, drove it back, and we fed it to my dad. And he ate on Wednesday, and he went into a coma and passed away on Saturday. So this was his last meal. That's what kept me coming back. Not that I just got free meals, but he treated me like family.
Of course, this moment is about more than just Katz's. Wherever you live in the country, I'll bet there is a place, maybe in your hometown or in a town that you visit, that reminds you of this story, right? That special place with comfort food that you love to go to all the time. There is another thing. Guess what they're going to do with the building? In 10 years' time, they're going to crush it, and they're going to build a condo. And I just have to read this to make sure I understand it correctly. The new owner says that the new building will be in a pastrami sandwich design. So think about that. That is The National for May 24th. Good night.